Another place of articulation that certain diagrams of phonetics have is the one known as the retroflex, flexing. So retroflex has to do with our famous R sound. So raw retroflex in American English, this American R doesn't occur in Spanish. In Spanish, the R that we have es más distinta, es rara. It's called a trill, and it has more of a vibrating quality to it. So retroflex R, raw, is the one found in ri, ro, and re. So the way that it's produced is with the tip of my tongue. There's the tip of my tongue and the alveolar ridge. So it's the tip of my tongue approaching or interacting with the alveolar region. So if you can see, there's like a little line here to talk about the retroflex. It's like, it's my tongue curling back towards the alveolar ridge, but it doesn't touch it. So it stays in this kind of in-between region between my tongue and this region. So it stays in this line. So that's called the retroflex. So many speakers of English don't have this sound that occurs in that line, in that space between the alveolar and the tongue. What sounds of English don't have that r? British English, standard British English is R-less. So they say car and not car. Certain dialects of the Northeast of the United States, like Boston English, and as well, perhaps, I believe, perhaps dialects of New York City English. So speakers who pronounce R at the ends of words may also have retroflex sounds with the tip of the tongue raised in ire, our, and air. So it's a sound that doesn't just occur by raising the tip of your tongue against this region for these sounds at the beginning, but it's also a sound that occurs at the end of a word. So that's called the retroflex sound. Another place of articulation that we have for consonants is called the palatal. So palatal, if you think about the word, it sounds like palate. Specifically, we can think of the hard palate, all right? So that's because sounds that are classified as palatal take place in the hard palate region of our mouth. So perhaps you can try saying the first sound in this word slowly. So it's you, right? But let's say you slowly. You. So you, it's kind of weird because it involves a lot of back to front effort. Is produced by raising the front of the tongue. So the front of the tongue, this is a tip blade. Here's the front. So it's the front of the tongue towards the hard palate. Okay, so that's a palatal sound. You in you is one of the palatal sounds in English. Okay, so if you think of a palatal consonant, you in yes, you in you, etc. Another sound that we have is called the velar. So the velar sound, if you think about the word, sounds like velum. And that's because consonants that take place there are taking place in the soft palate, aquí. So the obstruction of air, la obstrucción del aire, está sucediendo acá atrás. And usually, the part of the tongue that can reach to that back part is the back of the tongue. So velar sounds are produced by the back of my tongue and it pressing or interacting with the soft palate I. So those are velar sounds. What velar sounds do we have? Well, we have some. We have k, g, and ng. Ng is considered its own sound because this combination of sounds occurs so much in American English and in English that we can treat it as its own entity. So in phonetics, it's often represented by an N, así, with a little dangling appendage like that, así. And that stands for the combination NG. So NG occurs in sing, sung, rang, rung, hang, hung, right? So it's quite common. So ng occurs here in the back of my mouth, g, hag as well, hack as well. So if you were to put a mirror in front of your mouth and say these words out loud, hack, hag, hang, you could actually see the back of your tongue elevated to that back part of the roof of your mouth, the velum. So you can appreciate it. See if I can. So altogether, we've spoken about a lot of new words that you've perhaps never seen before to talk about consonants. So these are just like scientific terms to help you make sense of where in the mouth sounds are being produced. So we spoke about places of articulation. Let's see if you can, I can write this in a text that you can see better. Can I make the text bigger? Perhaps, I'm not sure. Anyway, so we spoke about places of articulation. Specifically, we spoke about dental sounds. So we have dental, interdental, so between teeth. We spoke about labial sounds, so they involve the teeth. So we have bilabial, which uses both lips, or labiodental, which uses lips and the bottom lip and upper teeth. And we also spoke about alveolar consonants, so alveolar place of articulation. We also spoke about palatal sounds. And finally, we spoke about velar consonant sounds. So these are the different places where our obstruction of air can happen. And in our alveolar category, we also spoke about a specific place of articulation for our American R sounds that happen with lip, tip of tongue, rising towards alveolar ridge. Right. So far, these are our labels: dental, labial, alveolar, retroflex, palatal, velar. All right. So the first two places of articulation we discussed, bilabial and labiodental, tend to be categorized as belonging to one category called the labial category. Now, the next four sounds that we discussed, dental, alveolar, retroflex, and palatal alveolar, which was that sound was also discussed after alveolar, palatal alveolar. So palatal alveolar is the region between hard palate and the alveolar ridge. So these four parts, dental alveolar, retroflex, and palatal alveolar, are sometimes categorized as belonging to one class of sounds called coronal. So coronal meaning corona, crown, right? This is because in the production of dental alveolar, retroflex, and palatal alveolar sounds, the part of the tongue that is used the most to produce all of those consonants is the tip or the blade. So the tip or the blade is la parte de al frente de la lengua. So maybe you can think about that as being la corona de la lengua. So the tip of the tongue or the blade is raised towards any of these regions. So oftentimes people will call them coronal sounds because they have this similarity of the part of the tongue, the same part of the tongue approaching them. Meanwhile, velar articulations or velar consonants are called dorsal. So piensa de la espina dorsal or whatever. So dorsal sounds use the back of the tongue. The back of the tongue is raised towards the velum, right? It would be a little bit hard to have the tip or the blade y para y sepa el velum. It's maybe you can do it, but it's kind of, maybe you can choke. It could be quite difficult. And finally, palatal sounds, hard palate sounds like yeah, right, are sometimes classified as coronal and other times as dorsal. And the reason for this is because if you think about it, palatal en medio de la boca, in the middle, the hard palate. So sounds that are produced here are quite mobile. They can go either or way, right? So you could have part at the back of the tongue interacting with the hard palate, or you could have the tip or the blade in the hard palate region. So these are just umbrella terms or umbrella classifications for the labels that I've introduced. So make sure that when you're reviewing for the quiz that you go through these terms and look at the image, look at the vocal tract, and try to make sense. Okay, CA alveolar, that means that the tip or the blade of my tongue is against the alveolar ridge. Toca el alveolar ridge. So maybe, you know, by looking at the drawing and looking at the terms, it can be a lot easier for you to understand. So in summary, we have different places of articulation. So a trick that you can do to remember the different places of articulation is to think about the consonant produced at the beginning of these examples. So phi has my upper teeth and my bottom lip. So that's a labiodental sound. Phi has my teeth between my teeth, sorry, my tongue between my teeth. So it's interdental. C has the tip of my tongue towards the alveolar ridge. So that's an alveolar sound. She has the kind of center part, kind of blade of my tongue against that area between the palatal and alveolar region. Another exercise that you can do, besides learning where these sounds belong, where they belong in terms of classification, is think about whether they are voiced or voiceless. So remember that in our last time that we met, we spoke about the larynx, que está aquí. The larynx está en tu neck. In your larynx, you have your vocal folds, where your Adam's apple would be if you were male. So in your vocal folds, you have two muscular folds, como dos cortinas, and these curtains can either open or close, right? So according to how the vocal folds are moving, that's gonna also influence your sound quality. So if your vocal folds are apart, se forma como un círculo, air can go out freely, right? But if your vocal folds are together, tan junto, and they form a narrow passage, that means that the air from the airstream is trying to get out. So your muscular folds empiezan a moverse ahí against each other, and you have a vibrating quality to the sound because there's a narrow passage and the air is trying to come out. So you get like a buzzing quality, and you feel it here when you touch your neck here. So that was something that we discussed last time we met as well. The state of the vocal folds, if they're close together, they are, this is the vocal folds. If they're like that, they are voiced sounds, voiced, because the air only has a narrow passage, and it's hitting the vocal folds like that and making them vibrate as well. Zzz. But if my vocal folds are together, are apart, sorry, then that sound is voiceless. So the air comes out freely. Voiceless sound. And another manner of articulation that is not found in this particular slide, sorry, another place of articulation that I'm going to add here is the glottal. Glottal. So glottal as a place of articulation is here in the larynx, where my vocal folds are. We have the glottis, lo que se llama el glottis. So essentially, there's only one glottal sound in standard American English, y es la H. We also have another symbol that's a glottal sound, which is represented by a sort of question mark. And this is called an audible pause. It's the sound or the lack of sound in certain compound words or certain phrases like, oh, it's that pause occurs here. So that's a temporary obstruction of air. So we could by default call that a consonant. Oh, so that's called a glottal sound. And the H in hello also occurs here. Hell. Okay, so these are two of our glottal sounds in American English. So glottal here is another place of articulation. Okay, so if you think about whether either of these sounds are voiced or voiceless, you can maybe touch your Adam's apple and say them out loud. That sounds like it's voiceless. 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 What about this one? Voiceless. So now we're going to revise the oronasal process, but I'm going to do this in a separate video. So that was my discussion of places of articulation, and there will be some practice problems in this topic for you to identify consonant sounds. Something that could be helpful is if you go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a very good source for studying linguistics because often there are linguists that edit Wikipedia entries for educational purposes. So you can go to Wikipedia and look up English phonology. So if I go to the Wikipedia page of English phonology, what shows up? This is the entry. And we have a chart for the consonants of American English. So maybe I can zoom into that. Let me see how I can zoom in. I lost it. So this chart has all of the symbols of standard American consonants. K, t, p, b, d, g, sh, s, f, v, z, z. This consonant is palatal alveolar, post-alveolar. So the cool thing about using Wikipedia is that Wikipedia, or the International Phonetic Alphabet as well, the way that it's structured is that the column here, la columna en el eje de X, the columns have the names for the places of articulation that we've discussed. So labial, dental, alveolar, post-alveolar, palatal, velar, glottal. Okay, so it has the names for the places of articulation. So notice how in this particular chart, our retroflex, lo ponen como si fuese alveolar. And that's because we mentioned it's the tongue being raised towards the alveolar region. So you have place of articulation up here, and then you have the consonants. So glottal, ha, see? Velar, g, u, palatal, j, y, sorry. And if you don't know what a symbol stands for or how the sound of that symbol sounds like, you can just go to the symbol and click on it. Y te va a llevar. It's going to take you to a separate Wikipedia page. It's going to take you to a separate Wikipedia page for that symbol that you don't know, and you can play it.
The.
The. So it tells me how to produce that sound that I'm not familiar with. And then if I go down, it's going to tell me how it's classified, and it's probably going to tell me some examples of where it occurs. So these are all the languages in which that sound occurs. And in English, it occurs in this, okay? And I could play it as well, probably. We said this. There's a recording.
This.
There you go. So this is a cool thing about using this interactive chart under Wikipedia English phonology. Like, this is a way that you can look at the labels for place of articulation up here, and then look at some of the symbols down here and familiarize yourself with them. So, ya, wa, j, z, the, v, sh, x, g, j, j, d, b, p, t, ch, k, So these two sounds we're going to talk about in later classes. So if you notice, we haven't spoken about them, and they seem to be a mixture of symbols, and we're going to be talking about them in our next class. Okay, so this is the end for places of articulation, and we will continue with another video on the oral nasal process, and in our next class we're going to be talking about manner of articulation. Thank you so much for watching.